when liquidity disappeared without a crash. There was no collapse, no screaming headlines, no sudden plunge to force attention. And yet, something essential vanished in the market almost overnight. This story matters now because liquidity is the invisible force that makes markets feel safe. It is the difference between movement and paralysis, between adjustment and disaster. When liquidity disappears without a crash, it creates a danger far harder to recognize and far more difficult to escape. To understand how a market can seize up while prices remain intact, we need to return to the moment flow quietly stopped. It began during a period of relative calm. Volatility was contained. Prices moved within expected ranges. From the outside, the system looked healthy. But beneath that surface, behavior had already begun to change. Participants were trading less aggressively. Orders were smaller. Commitments were shorter. The early reveal appeared in execution. Trades that once filled instantly began slipping. Large orders moved prices more than expected. Depth was still visible on screens, but felt thinner, more fragile, as if it might disappear the moment it was tested. Market makers noticed first. They adjusted spreads slightly, protecting themselves against uncertainty they couldn't quantify. Clearing firms followed, tightening terms just enough to matter. Funding desks shortened timelines. None of these changes were alarming on their own. Together, they altered how the market breathed. The system still functioned, but it no longer absorbed pressure. Participants adapted instinctively. They stepped back sooner. They avoided being last. Liquidity was no longer something to provide. It was something to preserve. Each decision made sense individually. Collectively, they starved the market of its most important resource. The danger wasn't falling prices. It was hesitation. Because liquidity doesn't vanish all at once. It thins, fragments, and retreats quietly until the moment it's truly needed and no longer there. And by the time anyone asks where it went, the answer is already uncomfortable. It left long before the crash everyone was waiting for. As liquidity thinned, the market's behavior grew cautious in ways price charts failed to capture. Volumes remained respectable, but commitment vanished. Trades were shorter-lived. Positions were trimmed quickly. Participants stopped leaning into moves and started waiting them out. The reveal deepened when stress tests quietly failed. Not catastrophically, just enough to raise eyebrows. Scenarios that assumed normal depth no longer held. Models showed that exits would take longer, cost more, and disturb prices far more than before. Liquidity was present, but only until it was needed. The early conflict emerged during routine volatility. A modest sell-off should have attracted buyers. Instead, bids retreated. Not because fundamentals changed, but because no one wanted to provide liquidity first. Each participant waited for confirmation that someone else would step in. No one did. Spreads widened further. Depth vanished in bursts. Prices didn't crash, but they lurched. Movement became uneven, jerky, unpredictable. Traders felt it immediately. The market no longer flowed. It stalled, then jumped, then stalled again. Inside institutions, concerns spread quietly. Risk managers flagged execution risk as a primary threat, not losses from price movement, but losses from being unable to move at all. Liquidity risk replaced market risk as the dominant fear. Funding desks reacted next. Haircuts increased. Terms shortened. Balance sheet usage became expensive. Providing liquidity now carried a penalty. With every adjustment, the incentive to step back grew stronger. This was a paradox. Everyone wanted liquidity. No one wanted to be liquidity. And in that contradiction, the market drifted closer to its most dangerous state. Not collapse, not panic, illiquidity without fear. Because when fear finally arrives in a market like that, there is nothing left to absorb it. The system was still standing, but it was hollow, and the hardest part was yet to come. The tension peaked when the market encountered a shock that should have been manageable. Not a crisis, not a disaster, just an event that required normal liquidity to function smoothly. Instead, the system hesitated. Orders hit the market and found less depth than expected. Prices moved sharply on modest volume. Participants pulled back simultaneously. unwilling to commit capital in an environment that punished presence. The absence became visible. The conflict intensified as defensive mechanisms activated. Risk models reduced exposure. Algorithms withdrew liquidity at the first sign of imbalance. What little depth remained fragmented across venues, making execution unpredictable and expensive. The market wasn't collapsing. It was refusing to engage. Volatility rose in uneven bursts. Prices jumped and froze. Traders felt trapped between movement and immobility. Entering a position felt risky. Exiting one felt worse. The market no longer offered continuity, only moments. Institutions recognize the danger. Liquidity is what allows adjustment. Without it, even small decisions carry outsized consequences. Yet stepping in meant absorbing risk no one could quantify. Providing liquidity required confidence that no longer existed. The system reached an uncomfortable equilibrium. Prices held, but only because activity slowed to a crawl. The market survived by becoming less alive, less responsive, less useful. This was the most dangerous phase, because when liquidity disappears without a crash, it creates the illusion that everything is fine. But beneath that illusion, fragility grows. Pressure accumulates with no release valve. Participants weren't afraid of loss anymore. They were afraid of being stuck. And a market built on hesitation can hold together for a time, but only until something forces it to move. That moment was approaching. The climax arrived not through panic, but through inevitability. A moment finally came when the market was forced to move. A routine adjustment, a necessary rebalance. Nothing dramatic in theory, but in practice, the absence of liquidity turned motion into stress. Prices shifted sharply on ordinary volume, not because sellers were desperate, but because buyers were absent. What little liquidity remained was consumed instantly. The illusion of stability broke, not with a crash, but with a realization. The market had been functioning on borrowed depth. Institutions reacted immediately. Trading was paused. Exposure limits tightened. Internal alarms focused on one word: exit. Not valuation, not direction, just the ability to move without causing damage. Liquidity had become the most valuable asset of all. The resolution unfolded through painful adjustment. Balance sheets were rebuilt. Capital was held back deliberately. Market makers returned slowly, cautiously, demanding compensation for risk that had once been ignored. Spreads widened. Volatility became less smooth, but more honest. Over time, the market regained flow, but it was different, less generous, less forgiving. Liquidity was no longer assumed. It was earned. Participants learned that price stability means nothing without depth behind it, that a market can look calm right up until the moment it needs to act. Modern relevance is impossible to miss. Today's market still rewards speed, still chase efficiency, still underestimate the value of slack. But the lesson endures. Liquidity is not a feature you notice when it's present. It's a crisis you remember when it's gone. When liquidity disappeared without a crash, it revealed something unsettling. The market hadn't been strong. It had been quiet. And quiet can hide fragility longer than fear ever could. Subscribe to join the journey. When liquidity